Dr. Jake Miller rushed to save a lion cub from a deadly cobra, driven by memories of his own lost son. What he discovered about why the snake was really there will change how you see the wild forever. Dr. Jake Miller pulled his dust-covered Land Rover to a stop at the edge of the Zambezi Wilderness Research Station. The engine ticked as it cooled in the oppressive African heat, but Jake remained motionless behind the wheel, staring at the photograph taped to his dashboard. A 3-year-old boy with bright blue eyes and a gap-toothed grin clutched a stuffed lion to his chest. "Hey, buddy," Jake whispered to the photo, his voice hoarse from the long drive. "Daddy's here to help some of your animal friends." 2 years. 2 years since the accident that shattered his world. 2 years since he'd held Tommy's small hand as the monitors flatlined. 2 years since he'd made a promise at a tiny graveside that he would dedicate his life to protecting the innocent creatures his son had loved so much. Jake grabbed his veterinary kit and radio equipment, checking the batteries one final time. The research station was 50 miles from the nearest human settlement. If something went wrong out here, he was truly alone. His mission was simple: conduct a health survey on the local lion pride, collect blood samples, and document any signs of disease. Routine work for a wildlife veterinarian with 8 years of field experience. What he didn't know was that routine was about to become anything but. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Mopane woodland as Jake followed the lion pride's tracks toward their preferred watering hole. His practiced eye read the story in the dust: a healthy pride of 8 adults and what appeared to be several cubs. Good news for the conservation project. The radio crackled with static. Jake adjusted the frequency, trying to reach base camp, but the signal was too weak. He was officially cut off from civilization. As he approached a cluster of rocky outcroppings near the seasonal water source, a sound stopped him in his tracks. High-pitched, desperate cries echoed off the rocks, the unmistakable distress call of a lion cub. Jake's heart clenched. The sound was so similar to Tommy's cries during those final weeks in the hospital. He forced the memory away and focused on his training. A cub in distress could mean injury, separation from the pride, or worse, human poachers. Moving carefully through the rocks, Jake spotted the source of the cries. A tiny lion cub, no more than 2 or 3 months old, was trapped in a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. The golden fur was matted with dirt, and dried tears streaked the small face. Those wide, terrified eyes. "Oh God," Jake breathed. They were the exact same shade of blue as Tommy's. The cub's cries intensified when it saw him, tiny paws scrambling uselessly against the smooth rock walls. It was clearly dehydrated and weak, probably separated from the pride for hours, maybe even days. Jake's professional assessment was grim. Without immediate intervention, the cub would die within hours from dehydration and exposure. The nearest water was this seasonal pool, just 20 feet away, but it might as well have been 20 miles given the cub's trapped position. "It's okay, little guy," Jake whispered, slowly approaching. "I'm going to get you out of there." As he knelt and reached for his equipment, Jake felt something shift inside him. For the first time since Tommy's death, he felt genuine purpose beyond mere obligation. This wasn't just another animal to treat. This was a chance to save an innocent life, a chance his son had never gotten. Jake had just opened his veterinary kit when the sound reached him, a low, continuous hissing that seemed to come from the rocks themselves. His blood turned to ice as he recognized the threat. Snake, a big one. Moving with glacial slowness, Jake turned his head toward the sound. What he saw nearly stopped his heart. A massive king cobra, easily 15 feet in length, was emerging from a hidden crevice in the rocks. Its hood was partially expanded, and those cold, calculating eyes were fixed directly on him. The snake's body, thick as a man's thigh, coiled and uncoiled with hypnotic precision as it positioned itself between Jake and the trapped cub. Every instinct screamed at Jake to run. A bite from a king cobra this size would deliver enough venom to kill him in 15 minutes, 20 if he was lucky. And he was 50 miles from the nearest anti-venom, with no radio contact and no hope of rescue. But the cub's desperate cries continued behind the massive serpent, and those blue eyes flashed in Jake's memory. Not the cub's eyes, but Tommy's. The eyes of his son, looking up at him from that hospital bed, trusting Daddy to make everything okay, and Daddy had failed. "Not again," Jake whispered. The Cobra seemed to sense his resolve. The hood expanded to its full, terrifying width, nearly 2 feet across, and the hissing intensified. The message was clear: come any closer and die. Jake's mind raced through his options. His medical training provided clinical, terrifying clarity about what a bite would mean: massive tissue necrosis, respiratory paralysis, cardiac arrest. Even if he could somehow reach his emergency epinephrine, it would only buy him minutes, not salvation. But medical training also taught him about risk assessment and calculated decisions. And sometimes, when a life hung in the balance, calculated risks were all you had. The cub's cries were getting weaker. Jake's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. Sarah had slipped it onto his finger 13 years ago, promising to love him through whatever life brought them. She'd kept that promise through Tommy's illness, through the devastating loss, through the dark months when Jake could barely function. He kissed the ring gently, then set it on a flat rock alongside the photograph of Tommy. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered to the photo. "Daddy couldn't save you, but maybe I can save him." The Cobra watched his movements with unblinking eyes, head swaying slightly as it tracked every motion. Jake estimated the distance: 12 feet from his position to the snake, another 8 feet from the snake to the cub, 20 feet between him and either salvation or certain death. Jake had one advantage. His veterinary kit contained emergency supplies that might create a distraction. Smoke grenades designed for wildlife management, originally intended to disperse aggressive animals during medical procedures, if he could create enough confusion. The plan was simple and probably suicidal. Deploy the smoke grenade, use the distraction to rush past the Cobra, grab the cub, and retreat before the snake could strike. Simple, probably suicidal. But it was the only chance either of them had. "Tommy," Jake whispered to the photograph, "help Daddy be brave." The cub let out another weak cry, and Jake's resolve hardened to steel. Jake's hands moved with practiced precision as he prepared the smoke grenade. The Cobra's head tracked his movements, hood maintaining its full intimidating spread, but the snake held its position, almost as if it was waiting. The thought was ridiculous. Snakes didn't wait. They reacted to threat and opportunity with pure predatory instinct. This Cobra saw him as a threat to whatever it was protecting, probably a nest or territory that included the area where the cub was trapped. Jake pulled the pin on the smoke grenade and threw it toward the rocks to the Cobra's left. The device hissed and began pumping thick white smoke into the air, creating an expanding cloud that obscured vision and filled the area with the acrid smell of chemical agents. The Cobra's head snapped toward the disturbance, hood flaring even wider. But instead of striking at the grenade or retreating from the smoke, the massive snake did something that defied every piece of Jake's wildlife training. It held position, protecting the approach to the cub. Jake didn't have time to analyze the strange behavior. The smoke was spreading but wouldn't last long in the afternoon breeze. This was his window. "For Tommy!" Jake shouted and launched himself forward. The world slowed to crystalline clarity as adrenaline flooded his system. He could see every scale on the Cobra's massive form, could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel the rocky ground jarring his feet with each desperate step. The Cobra turned toward him, mouth opening to reveal fangs like ivory daggers. But instead of striking, the snake's head followed his movement with what almost looked like recognition? Evaluation question mark. Jake dove past the Cobra's coiled body, feeling the displacement of air as the massive head tracked his movement. His hands closed around the terrified cub's small form, and for one heart-stopping moment, he felt the tiny body trembling against his chest. Just like Tommy used to do during thunderstorms. As Jake clutched the cub to his chest, preparing to make his desperate retreat, the smoke began to clear. And in the growing visibility, he saw something that made no sense. Eyes. Multiple pairs of eyes, reflecting the afternoon sunlight from the shadows beyond the rocky outcropping. Not snake eyes, something else, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The cub in his arms suddenly went rigid, a low whimper escaping its tiny throat. But It wasn't looking at the cobra. It was looking past Jake, toward those eyes in the shadows. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the rocks, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Jake's blood turned to ice as he recognized the sound. Hyenas. But not the normal whooping calls of a healthy pack. These sounds were wrong, aggressive, erratic, filled with a manic energy that spoke of something far more dangerous than simple predators. As the smoke dissipated further, Jake saw them clearly. 3 spotted hyenas, foam flecking their muzzles, eyes wild and unfocused. Their movements were jerky, uncoordinated, filled with the unmistakable signs of neurological damage. Rabid. The entire pack was rabid. And they had been stalking toward the waterhole, toward the trapped cub, when Jake had arrived. The cobra, Jake realized with stunning clarity, hadn't been threatening the cub at all. It had been protecting it. The largest of the rabid hyenas stepped into full view, lips pulled back in a foam-flecked snarl. Its eyes were completely unfocused, showing no recognition of the massive cobra coiled just 15 feet away. Rabies had destroyed its natural fear responses, leaving only aggression and hunger. Jake found himself in an impossible triangle. Rabid hyenas advancing from one direction, a massive cobra between him and escape, and a helpless cub in his arms that couldn't survive another hour without water and medical attention. The cobra's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. It had been guarding this territory not from Jake, but from the diseased predators that posed a threat to everything in the area. When Jake had approached, the snake had simply maintained its defensive position, evaluating whether this new arrival was friend or foe. The lead hyena let out a manic laugh and began stalking toward them, its rabid packmates spreading out to flank their position. The cobra's hood flared to maximum extension, and for the first time, it shifted position. Not to threaten Jake, but to place itself between the advancing hyenas and the human with the cub. In that moment, Jake Miller, grieving father and dedicated veterinarian, realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. The cobra wasn't just protecting territory. It was making a conscious decision to defend the innocent and vulnerable, regardless of species. Just like Jake was doing, just like any father would do. "Easy, friend," Jake whispered to the massive snake. "We're on the same side here." The cobra's head turned slightly toward him, and for one impossible moment, Jake could have sworn he saw intelligence and acknowledgement in those ancient eyes. The hyenas charged. What happened next would haunt Jake's dreams for years, not with nightmares, but with awe. The king cobra moved with a speed and precision that defied physics. 15 feet of pure muscle and lethal intent uncoiled like a release spring, striking the lead hyena with enough force to send the diseased predator tumbling across the rocky ground. But the cobra didn't bite. Instead, it used its massive body as a weapon, coiling around the hyena and crushing it with bone-snapping force, while simultaneously positioning itself to strike at the advancing packmates. Jake pressed himself against the rocks, shielding the cub with his body while watching nature's deadliest predator fight to protect them both. The second hyena leaped toward the cobra's exposed flank, but the snake's head whipped around with impossible speed, fangs sinking deep into the attacker's neck. The third hyena, driven beyond all rational thought by its disease, actually tried to attack Jake directly. But the cobra, even while engaged with 2 other opponents, managed to lash out with its tail, tripping the diseased predator and sending it crashing into the rocky wall. Within minutes, it was over. 3 rabid hyenas lay motionless around the waterhole, their threat to the ecosystem permanently ended. The cobra slowly uncoiled from the first hyena's crushed form and turned toward Jake. Its hood gradually contracted, and the aggressive posturing melted away. For a long moment, Veterinarian and Serpent regarded each other across the blood-stained rocks. The cub in Jake's arms let out a weak mew, and the cobra's head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging the sound. "Thank you," Jake whispered. The massive snake held his gaze for another heartbeat, then slowly retreated into the rocks, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Alone now, except for the cub, Jake quickly moved to the water's edge and began the delicate process of rehydration. The tiny lion was severely dehydrated, but not critically so. It would survive with proper care. As he worked, using his veterinary training to slowly introduce fluids and check for injuries, Jake found himself thinking about the cobra's behavior. In 8 years of wildlife medicine, he had never witnessed anything like it. Snakes were supposed to be driven by pure instinct, incapable of the kind of complex decision-making he had just observed. But then again, he had never been a father before Tommy, and fatherhood had taught him that love could drive any creature to impossible acts of courage and sacrifice. The cub's tiny tongue began lapping at the water Jake offered, and those blue eyes, so much like Tommy's, looked up at him with trust and gratitude. "What should I call you, little guy?" Jake murmured as he continued the treatment. The answer came without thought. "Tommy. Your name is Tommy." As if in response, the cub let out a small purr and pressed against Jake's chest. For the first time in 2 years, Jake Miller smiled. Really, genuinely smiled. Jake spent the next 3 hours caring for Tommy, monitoring his recovery and preparing for the eventual reunion with his pride. As the sun began to set, painting the African sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the sound of approaching lions echoed across the savannah. The pride had returned to their waterhole. Jake quickly gathered his equipment and retreated to a safe distance, carrying Tommy to a position where he could release the cub within sight of the approaching lions. The little one had recovered enough strength to walk, though he stayed close to Jake's legs, reluctant to leave his rescuer. A massive lioness, clearly Tommy's mother, appeared first, her powerful frame silhouetted against the sunset. When she spotted her missing cub, the sound she made was pure maternal joy and relief. Tommy's head snapped up at his mother's call, and he let out an answering cry. But before running to her, the tiny cub did something that brought tears to Jake's eyes. He rubbed against Jake's leg one final time, a gesture of gratitude as clear as any words. "Go on, buddy," Jake whispered. "Go home." Tommy bounded toward his mother, who immediately began the intensive grooming and bonding ritual that would re-establish their connection. Other Pride members emerged from the gathering darkness, and soon the entire family was reunited around the waterhole that had nearly been a death trap. Jake watched from the shadows, his heart full in a way it hadn't been since losing his son. He had kept his promise. He had saved an innocent life. As he prepared to leave, something caught his eye. A massive shape moving through the rocks near the water's edge. The cobra had returned, and it was watching the lion reunion with what Jake could only describe as satisfaction. Their eyes met one final time across the darkening savannah. 2 fathers, 2 protectors, acknowledging their shared victory. The drive back to base camp passed in a blur of stars and reflection. Jake found himself thinking not about what he had lost, but about what he had found. Purpose. Healing. A reason to smile again. When he finally reached the research station, Jake sat in his Land Rover for a long time, looking at the photograph of his son taped to the dashboard. "I kept my promise, Tommy," he whispered. "I saved him, and maybe you helped me save myself." He picked up his wedding ring from the passenger seat where he had placed it after the rescue and slipped it back onto his finger. Sarah would want to hear this story. All of it. For the first time in 2 years, Dr. Jake Miller was looking forward to going home. Dr. Jake Miller knelt by the same waterhole, collecting the final samples for his annual Lion Pride Health Survey. The work had become more than just professional obligation. It was a pilgrimage, a chance to visit the place where his life had changed forever. A low rumble made him look up from his equipment. A magnificent young male lion, nearly full-grown now, was approaching the water's edge. The animal moved with the confident grace of a Pride member who had never known hunger or fear, whose bright eyes held intelligence and strength. "Hello, Tommy," Jake whispered. The young lion's head turned at the sound, and for a moment, those same blue eyes, now mature and wise, looked directly into Jake's. Recognition flickered there, followed by something that looked remarkably like gratitude. A distant trumpeting made both man and lion turn their heads. A massive bull elephant was charging toward them across the savannah, its ears spread wide in aggressive display. Someone or something had agitated the enormous animal, and it was heading straight for the waterhole with deadly intent. Jake fumbled for his tranquilizer gun, knowing he had seconds before several tons of enraged elephant reached them. But before he could raise the weapon, Tommy did something extraordinary. The young lion stepped between Jake and the charging elephant, his body language shifting from relaxed to protective in an instant. A low, warning growl emerged from his throat, not the roar of a challenger, but the firm voice of a guardian drawing a line in the sand. The elephant, surprised by the unexpected opposition, slowed its charge and evaluated this new threat. After a tense moment, it turned away, trumpeting its frustration, but recognizing that this particular patch of ground was under protection. Tommy held his defensive position until the elephant had disappeared into the distance, then turned back to Jake with what could only be described as a nod of acknowledgement. The rescued had become the rescuer. Jake's eyes filled with tears as he watched Tommy drink from the same waterhole where their lives had intersected 2 years earlier. Somewhere in the rocks, he knew, a massive cobra continued its patient vigil, protecting the sacred space where courage and compassion had triumphed over fear and death. "Thank you," Jake whispered to both his guardians, seen and unseen. "Thank you for teaching me that love never really dies. It just finds new ways to protect the ones we care about." As he packed his equipment and prepared to leave, Jake Miller carried with him the knowledge that some promises transcend death and some bonds transcend species. In saving Tommy, he had saved himself. In losing his son, he had found his purpose. And in the vast African wilderness, where cobras protect cubs and lions guard veterinarians, anything was possible for those brave enough to love without reservation. The circle of life, Jake realized, wasn't just about the natural world. It was about the courage to keep caring, even when caring means risking everything. Even when caring means facing down death itself. Because that's what fathers do. That's what protectors do. That's what love demands.